Regent made John Law the titular lord of this manor, the first and only Duke de Arkansas. The year 1719 was a truly wonderful time. Law's notes went out by the hundreds of millions to pay the regent's debts. People paid off and the notes rushed to buy stock in the Bank Royale, the wonderful machine that was making the money, or in the Mississippi Company that was thought to be mining the gold. The stocks went up and up. It's to this year that we owe the useful French word millionaire. Crowds also swarmed here to the Place Vendôme, to Law's headquarters. Some hoped to catch a glimpse of him. Some, on one pretext or another, hoped to get inside. Those who got inside asked Law to sell them stock. Women investors, the histories tell us with much pleasure, offered themselves as an added inducement. This must have been an interesting experience for someone from Scotland. Anyhow, it would have been an interesting experience for anyone from the part of Scottish Canada that I came from. If there were occasional doubts, there were also means of dispelling them. Criminals and mendicants were flushed out of their accustomed haunts, marched through the streets with shovels, as though on the way to New Orleans to mine gold. And some actually went. Quite a few were soon seen in Paris again, having sold their shovels. Ladies of medium virtue, as literally they were called, were also recruited as wives. It had seemed a perfect circle. Law's notes going out to pay the regent's debts, coming back to buy the stock. But there came a day in 1720 when serious doubts developed. People brought their notes not to buy stock, but to the Bank Royale for the gold and silver that were not there. The gold and silver that, by the nature of banking, and this bank especially, were not there. The rush to get hard money became a panic. The notes became worthless. The Rue Quincampoix, where Law had started the bank, was quiet again. It was a classic crash, the classic crash. For a while, people had felt rich, and prices being good and trade lively, to some extent they had been. Now everyone was poor, or so it seemed. What of the Duke de Arkansas? Parisians got what pleasure they could from proposing in a song that his notes be put to the most vulgar possible use. The regent had to protect John Law from the mob, and Law went to Venice, where he died in poverty. The Duc de Saint-Simon, who chronicled Law's adventures, thought he failed because the French lacked restraint. The English would do better. The English did do better. 20 years before Law's arrival in Paris, a fellow countryman, William Patterson, also from the Scottish lowlands, had sold essentially the same idea to William of Orange. William, like the regent, needed money. He too got it in return for the right of a bank to make loans with newly issued notes. In 1694, out of this bargain, the Bank of England was born. Patterson was soon thrown out, most likely over a conflict of interest. It seems he was promoting a rival bank, but Patterson's bank flourished. Central bankers the world around still bask in its aura. To be a central banker is to be, automatically, a man of wisdom in touch with the most arcane financial mysteries of the time. This is the legacy of the Bank of England. The men of the bank remain conscious of that legacy. They guard well the original charter and William's seal. The decisions that were taken by the court of directors in this handsome room were not all that mysterious. With a little diligence and attention, they could have been understood by the people who marveled at their wisdom, and they can be understood by you. The Bank of England, then as now, was a banker's bank. As such, it loaned money to the everyday banks, the banks where people keep their money, and the banks where businessmen get their loans. In this role, it restrained the banks, the ordinary banks, when they seemed to be lending too freely. When, by the process we saw back in Amsterdam, such loans were creating too many deposits and thus manufacturing too much money, and therefore, among other things, causing prices to go up. The bank restrained such lending by the commercial banks by putting up the interest rate it charged. This was called the bank rate. And it discouraged borrowing by selling the securities it possessed for cash. When it did this, the Bank of England transferred the cash from the strong rooms of the bank to its own vaults. And in consequence, the ordinary banks, the commercial banks, had less money to lend. They might then have to borrow from the Bank of England at the new high rate in order to replenish their cash. In reverse, the same action would expand loans, increase the money supply, cause business to expand, prices to go up, or so in any case it was hoped. You now understand the bank rate, what in the United States is called the discount rate, and you understand open market operations, for that is what the sale of those securities and the transfer of cash into the vaults of the central bank really means. And in consequence of understanding these two things, you've largely mastered the essentials of central banking, as these were perfected here in the Bank of England in the last century. I must mention one more function. In the nature of banking, both the original depositor and the man who borrows and gets a deposit have a claim on the same cash. And if they both come at the same time for that cash, there's obviously going to be trouble, what my offspring used to call a bad scene. And in times of panic and despair, there's a very good chance that they both may come. When this happens, it's the task of the central bank to rise above the panic and above the despair and ensure that the banks have the cash to provide everybody with their money. And here we come to the paradox of banking, that if depositors know they can get their money, they almost never want it. In the last century, the Bank of England came to supply this assurance by supplying the commercial banks, or as in England they are called, the clearing banks, with the money to cover all of the claims that were made upon them by their depositors. It perfected the further function of the central bank, which is to be, as it's now called, the lender of last resort. The Victorians raised open market operations, the bank rate, services, the lender of last resort, to the level of art. Men heard with grave attention that the bank rate had been raised or lowered. They didn't know what it meant, but they knew it was an act of extreme wisdom. Wisdom hadn't come as easily as the Victorians supposed. The bank had narrowly escaped involvement in the South Sea bubble, and it was caught up in later periods of speculative euphoria. In these fine cartoons, the bank, the old lady of Threadneedle Street, is under attack for abetting Pitt's inflationary schemes, printing paper money. The accusation was in fact sound, but not very practical. It was, it happens, the only way of getting money quickly to fight Napoleon. The bank was captured by the general spirit of the times. It's the old question: who regulates the regulators? Who is the king in a world of the blind